What's going on, guys? Welcome to my Angular tutorial. This is an interesting video. I'm a React developer and have built a lot of complex enterprise level applications, worked in a lot of big companies. Coming from a very strong opinionated React background, I thought of trying Angular for the first time and sharing my findings with you guys. I encountered a lot of resistance from Angular developers to try React, and the same goes for React developers. Best way to find more about Angular is to build an app. Let's jump in and start building our movies watchlist app. Actually, let me give you a quick demo of the application. This is our home screen. These are some of the movies on our watch list. You can click on the eye icon and mark a movie watched. You can also click on the favorite icon to mark a movie as your favorite. This is the toolbar with navigation options. Add a movie will take us to a screen where we can add a movie to our watch list. We can add a movie name and provide an image URL. We can also mark the movie as watched and favorite. Angular has a command line interface which we can use to generate new projects, components, services, and a lot of other tasks. It is quite robust. First of all, we need to install Angular CLI. We can install it globally. Now we can use ng-new to generate new project. It is something similar to what we have in React ecosystem. Create React app. Okay, let's run the command and create new project. Let's see how smooth it is in comparison to create React app. Let's call our project movies watch list. Cool, it's asking to install Angular router. Yes, we need this. Angular provides out-of-the-box solution for this, so we don't have to install any external dependency for router. We are getting an option to select CSS or Sass. I'm gonna go and select Sass for this. It is pretty good that Angular provides these options out of the box, and we don't have to install external dependencies like we do in React for router, or in order to parse Sass, we usually require Node Sass. Okay, project is ready. Let's see what Angular CLI has generated for us. It's all TS extensions. Even if you don't use TypeScript at all, you just want to use TS extension and write JavaScript. This main.ts is like the entry point to Angular. What it does is import the app module, and app module is more like a root to our project. This is basically acting as a configuration file as well and bootstrapping our main app module. All the global styles can be placed into this Sass file. This is pretty much what we do in React. So we usually have index.sass or CSS file. Let's take a look at environments folder. So we have two environment files here. One is obviously for development. So we set production to false. And for this one, we set production to true. App is the main important folder. This will contain all your modules, components, services, assets, and directives. Let's take a look at the app.module. ng modules configure the injector and the compiler and help organize related things together. Browser module provides services that are essential to launch and run a browser app. You can add components, directives, and pipes under declarations. These are the only classes you can add to the declaration. We can add our app component here, which is the root of project. Imports makes the exported declarations of other modules available in the current module. Providers are to make services and values known to dependency injection. They are added to the root scope and they are injected to other services or directives that have them as dependency. Let's take a look at the app component. This is the root of our project as well. As for this TypeScript file, we import components from Angular core. Then we put this as component declaration. Selector is basically the HTML tag, which we will use to embed our component into HTML. Template URL is HTML file basically. All your HTML code will reside in that file. And styles URL is reference to your CSS file. You can have more than one. Let's take a look at the HTML file. This is auto-generated by Angular CLI. So it contains all the basic page structure and CSS. Let's go ahead and run the project by ng-serve. This is provided by Angular CLI. This is the default page. We can use this command to generate new components. This is again provided by Angular CLI, which is quite handy. Let's go ahead and clean this file up. We don't need all this rubbish here. So we have removed all the garbage, and now we are left with h1 tag, says movies watch list. Let's compile and run this and see if it reflects on the page. Beautiful. We can see our title here on this page. So that's all we want for now. Let's add some basic styling and fonts. So let's go to the global stylings, style CSS file, and let's clear this up. I already have the CSS file from the React project, which I did for watch movies list. So I'm gonna just copy and paste that CSS file. All we're doing here is, so we are getting this font from Google, setting some border sizing, and also we need this image here, which I'm gonna fetch in a minute. So this is the background for the whole app. And then we have button component styling here. And on focus and on active, we have different styling, just increase and decrease the scale a bit. And then we have some form controls, input, text input styling. Pretty simple. So that's about it. So we'll save and head back to the component. This is our background image. So I have placed it in the assets folder here. Let's see how it looks on the page. Nice, not too bad. So far so good. Okay, let's generate our first component. So we'll use ng-generate, Angular CLI command, and then we mention component. So we are generating component. If it's a new app, we define new here. And then we'll create a components folder so we can store all the components in that directory. And then we want to create a toolbar component. Let's hit run. Cool, component is generated. That's good. Actually, that's quite impressive. I mean, we can achieve the same in React with some scripts, but obviously we have to write some custom scripts to do that. So this is added to the app module automatically. So basically it's added to the declarations. And then let's take a look at the component itself. So it has created the components directory. If we drill down, we can see HTML file, styling file, some tests spec, which we don't care about for this project. And then let's take a look at the toolbar component. We got the selector, template URL, and implements on initialize, constructor. So that's pretty cool. Everything is set up and wired up nicely. Cool. Let's create another component, movies home. So that will be our landing page or home for the app. And last component we want to create is add movies. So this is basically next route. So it contains a form where you can enter the movie name, movie title, movie image, if the movie is your favorite or it's watched or still on your watch list. Cool, all three components are created. Let's have a quick look. So this is the main app and we have this components folder here. So we have our add movies homepage. This is our landing page. And then we have the toolbar, which will contain our navigation buttons, or you can call them routes. Now we can go ahead and add our app toolbar to the main app page. Okay, let's replace this with our component toolbar. So this is the HTML tag for our toolbar component, which we can see here in the toolbar component is defined like this. Because these are available in app module, so these are basically injected into every component. So Angular framework knows like app toolbar HTML prefix is for which component. Cool. So I've already added some basic styling, app wrapper. So let's have a quick look at the styling file. Pretty simple, setting the opacity of the background, width, height, display is flex, and direction is column, and we're setting the gap for 20 pixels. Let's have a quick look. Cool. So our toolbar text is displayed here. So that means it's wired up to the application. Now it's up to us to build the toolbar component itself, add the styling and navigation options. Now we have our basic pages set up. We can go ahead and set the routes. This route file was generated in the beginning when we were bootstrapping our project with Angular CLI. There was an option given to us if we want to set up the routes. Let's add our components to the routes with the paths. Let's get rid of this. And we can put the component in now. So default is movies homepage. So we set it without any path. We can leave it blank. That means it's a home page. And then add movie will point to add movies component. Cool, all set. I hate to admit, but I think this is much better and cleaner than how we do it in React. First, we have to use external library in React and then wire it up. But this is quite smooth and all out of box. Okay, now we need to render what is selected in the routes. And the way we do it is we add the routes in the HTML file, in the main component file. Right, we just need to add router outlet, and Angular framework takes care of rendering and switching of components behind the scene. Let's test the page and see if the routes are working. This is home page, so it's displayed correctly. Let's also check the add movies page and make sure that is working fine. Cool. All looks good then. Now routes are in place. We can build our toolbar and wire it up to the navigation. Let's start by creating a button component which we will use as navigation option. I have generated another component named button, and this is our TypeScript file. This is our HTML file. Now we can work with and add custom behaviors. Let's start by adding a couple of decorators. So one is input and the other one is going to be output. So basically these decorators are used for the property binding. So input is for displaying anything into HTML component. So here text we're setting it to empty at the moment, but this is basically setting the button text, and output decorator is used for the event handling, button clicks, or input field changes. All right, let's add the event handler here. So when we click on the element, we'll call this from our HTML. And what this is doing, basically, it's just emitting the event, bubbling the event up in the chain. So parent component can listen to this and act on this. So it's slightly different to React. The way React works is we usually pass callback functions from parent component to child component, or use context and stuff like that. But here we are just emitting it, and the component higher up in the chain can listen and subscribe to this. Now in button.html file, we can get rid of this. And let's have a button here. Let's assign class to button. This is from global styling file, which we initially created and added styles for button elements. Now we need to add click event handler. This is how we bind click events to handlers. We will bind it to onClick function of our component class, and parentheses. And now for the button text, we have a text property in our button.ts file. So this one. So now in order to bind this and display, we can just add text here. So we are not setting the text here or here because we want to set this text from parent component. Definitely from the toolbar component. So we're defining the class here, which is defined in our global styling file. If we look at this, so this is the style for the button, and then we define and bind the click handlers or other event handlers like this. And in order to display text or value from our component class, we use one-way property binding like this. Now our button component is ready. We can go ahead and wire it up in the toolbar. So let's start by adding some styles, which I'll copy from the React version of this application I did. I'll publish that soon as well. So all we are doing is setting the top bar container width and giving the height, and then background and setting the opacity, little bit like Netflix style. Positioning is fixed, and then display is grid, and then we are assigning the elements proportion of this. And then we have another container. This will contain our buttons, navigation buttons, and then we'll have a page title as well to indicate which section of page we are on. So pretty simple, plain CSS, nothing much. So let's save this. Cool. Now we want to make it dynamic rather than hard coding the buttons here. So the best way to do it is we need to have access to router instance from Angular. Router is a singleton instance injected via dependency injection pattern from Angular framework. So we get the access to that and just use the routes from there and generate the buttons based on the number of routes we have, and we can get the label as well from there. So let's start doing that. We import that from the Angular router. Next thing is we need to have the access to the instance. So we define a variable in constructor named router. So Angular knows, and it uses the dependency injection pattern to inject that variable in. So we get the instance, router instance from the application. Now all we need to do is create a variable and store the config. So we loop through the array of configs and just set the path. So if path is available, it's not null or undefined, then we use that. Otherwise, we use home, because path is, if you remember, we set the path to an empty string for the home page. Cool. So let's open the toolbar HTML file and let's add some HTML here. So basically, we want to loop through the routes here, which we defined in our TypeScript class, and generate the number of elements. Right, let's get rid of this. Now we create a div element with the class container, which we have here in our CSS file. So this is a grid layout. And next thing we want to do is add the page title here with the page title class and page title property from the TS file. We need to define that in a moment. Let's save this. Let's define the page title property here. So now the default is home, so we're providing that. And let's head back to HTML. So now we have this. Next would be setting up the, so we need the app buttons based on the however elements we have in our routes. So let's loop through. So looping in Angular, especially for HTML elements, is quite different to how we do it in React. It seems quite weird as well. But anyways, let's do it and see. Right, so we created a div wrapper here. This is our app button, the one we just created a moment ago. And this is how you loop in Angular for HTML elements to generate HTML items. So you have this ng4 director and you use that. And this is how you define your loop inside codes. And this is the text property. This is one-way binding. So we are getting it from route. So basically with each loop, it's going through the list of items in this routes array. It's just like a plain for loop, or you can just think of it as a map or any looping function on the array. And with each loop, we get the route. So route is basically, you get the path and the name and stuff like that. And then on button click, if you remember, we exposed this from the button component. Let me quickly bring that up. So this is our button component. So we did expose this as an output element. So when we define something with output decorator, that means it will be visible outside of this component, and anything emitted from this can be subscribed outside the component. So that's what we are doing here. So we are listening to that or creating a binding. And whenever button is clicked, we catch it here, change route, which we need to define in our TS file. And we just close it. So honestly speaking, this looks quite weird to me. I mean, not a very clean way to do the loops. So Angular basically advocates getting your HTML out of TS files, but then you end up putting your JavaScript code in quotes and strings, and it's really bizarre. I just hate it. Looks quite bad. Okay, let's add on change route click handler here. Cool. So change route. So we are expecting a route or string, and then we are setting the page title based on that. So default is home, but whenever it's changed, we are setting this property here, and then we are setting another variable path to go, and then we are checking if it's home. Then we are just pointing the application to the home page. Otherwise, we get the route, which in our case, because we only have 2 routes, so this will be add movies. And then this is how we do navigate to a certain URL or path. So we already have this router here, which is injected from the top, and then we navigate to the path. Right, so we have this function here now. So let's see, and let's check out the page and see if it's working in action. Let me bring that in. Okay, so as you can see, we have the toolbar here. We have the page title. We have 2 navigation options here. So let's click on this. So you can see add movie. Title is changing and updating as well. Let's go back home, and it's changing. Cool, nice. So this is all in place and working nicely. Our toolbar and navigation is in place. We can start working on the home page screen. Let's open this up. Sorry, this is the test. We don't need that yet. So this is the movies component, which is empty. Let's open the HTML file and also the CSS file. We need that. Cool. I think what we need to create another component that will be the movie tile, which will hold movie image and like or dislike, and then the watched or unwatched status or icons. Let's create another component. Okay, I have created the movie tile component via Angular CLI. I'm really loving this Angular CLI. It's so easy to generate components and files and directory structure. So this is really handy. Okay, let me get some CSS to start with for the movie tile. So I'm just gonna grab it from my React version of this app. So all we are doing here is, let me expand this. So we are having the movie tile wrapper. So this is the outer div or container div, then setting the max width and height. And then we're setting the poster wrapper. So this is basically the container or div which will have the poster image. We are setting some transition effect here, and then setting it to 0.5 seconds, and then the ease type, and then the and we trigger this on the hover effect. And we also like to have like icon bar, which will contain the favorite movie and watched movie icons. And then we have obviously icon bar will have some effect. Right, now we need some SVG icons. For that, we can install some of the dependencies from Font Awesome. So we can install free solid and free regular icons for both states. So let's go ahead and install this dependency. Right, these are the dependencies we need to install. So we are installing SVG core, and we are installing free solid SVG icons. These are the filled version of the icon, and these are the regular ones, non-filled versions. Let's go ahead and hit run. So this will install these dependencies. Let's grab those icons. So we want favorite hot and favorite eye. So these are the solid or filled version of the icons, and then we need the regular version as well, just to indicate non-selected version of the movie. So it's the icon name is same in both packages, so we just use a different alias. And then the eye icon is FA not watched, and this is not favorite. Let's add a space here. Let's create some properties for this component. So first is we're going to have the image URL for this movie card. So let's have that. So we again defining the input and then the image URL. So input directive, just to indicate this is settable from the HTML. And then next one would be, let me import that as well, input and output. So next one is the ID number for the movie. 2 Boolean variables, is watched and is favorite. So if it's watched, it's set to true or false, and same goes for the favorite one. And then we have output directive for the favorite click. So this is if the favorite is clicked on the movie tile, and watch click as well. So we are setting it to output. That means these are subscribable from the parent component. And then now we'll create a couple of default placeholder variables. We are setting the favorite to not and watched to not watched by default, unless we receive the response from Json server. We'll hit that in a minute. Let's set the values of these defaults in the ng on init. So this is the lifecycle method of Angular component. So this will be triggered as soon as component is ready and rendered. So what we are doing essentially here is setting this to opposite of the current value, and same goes for this one. So if it's watched, we are setting this icon, otherwise we are setting the not watched one. Same goes for this one. Let's hit save, and now we can add a couple of click handlers. Let's add one for the favorite icon click. So we are emitting when the event is clicked. Next, we'll add an event handler for the on watch clicked. And there we go, we're emitting this as well. Let's hit save, and I think that's pretty much what we need here in this component. So we have the image URL, ID, watched, and is favorite, and then we have 2 click handlers, event emitters. All right, cool. So that's good. We can move ahead. And let's start building the HTML bit. So this is our HTML for movie tile component. So again, we are using the movie tile wrapper class from Sass file. And then we have this container here. And let's start adding the poster wrapper first. So this is our poster wrapper, and then we are defining the image tag. Source is basically binded to image URL property from our TS component, TS file, sorry. Yeah, this property here. And width and height is given here. And let's define icon bar wrapper as well. So again, CSS, and then the icon property is binded to FA favorite, and this is binded to FA watched. And then obviously we are dealing with the click handler this way here. Bit an odd way to do it, but that's fine. Coming back from Flex background, like from 2012 or before, it was a bit similar if I remember top of my head. And then we are assigning these click handlers here. So these are the icons which we imported in our application. And that's our HTML movie tile ready. Let's double check if we have everything here. Yeah. And then this is our CSS styling. Right, as our movie tile is ready, now we can start working on movie's home component. So we need a variable array type. Let's set a default to empty. So basically we want an array of movies which we can display via the movie card item. So let's define an interface for this so we can have a typed movie properties. Okay, let's create a file here. Let's call it movies.ts. And now we can add our interface here. Let's call it movies, and the type we need here cool. So we need ID, title, image, basically image URL, and status if it's watched or favorite. This is good. Let's close this and go back, and now we can define array type movies. Cool. So that's sorted. Now we have the interface. Let's create another two arrays, with one of them will hold the movies which are on the watch list, which we want to watch, and the third array will hold the movies which are already watched. So let's go ahead and create another variable. Cool. So that's good. At this point, we need movies data now. So what we're going to do, basically install a JSON server to serve a JSON file. That will be our mock data, which we can use for this application. Let's go ahead and install that dependency. You can use the get method of the HTTP call. You can post it, you can update, you can put, you can delete. So it's a mini server and DB running just from this package, and it needs a DB file, which we'll create in a minute. But this is quite useful for quick prototypes and just to get going for your application, front-end applications. Let's hit run. Dependency is installed now. So now we need to create a db.json file, which will be used by JSON server. So let's go ahead and create that file. Let's call it db.json. So JSON server specifically looks for this file. Let me grab some mock data and put into this file. Let me close this. Let me make some space on this one. So let's paste this data in. So what we have here is, so we have the movies top list, and then we have the ID, title, image location, and then the status, if it's watched or not, and then if it's a favorite of yours. So image URL could be just a proper image URL as well from, you can just grab it from Google or anywhere. Cool. So that's our DB ready now. So now we can go ahead and create service for our application. Let's also add a command or script in our package config, so we can just run it from terminal. So let's go ahead and have one here. So now we can do npm run server, and this will start with watch mode enabled. So if we make any changes to DB, hopefully that will be reflected without restarting the server. So let's go ahead and run this as well. So npm run server. Cool, looks like it has worked, which is good. So let's check if we are getting the result back. Let's launch this in a browser. Nice one. We can see that the JSON file for the movie list is served. So this is pretty handy. Let's generate our service. We can use ng-cli to generate this. So ng service or services. Let me double check the documentation. Okay, it's service. Cool. So ng service, and then let's call the folder services. And then movies service. Cool. We got our services ready. Not ready, created by the CLI. Let's take a quick look. What is generated by CLI? Okay, so decorator mentioning it's injectable and provided into the root. Okay, that's cool. Movie service. Okay, we can rename this. Let's start creating the service. So Angular has a built-in module which does the fetching of data for your application. So it's not like React where we have to use external library, or we can use fetch as well, which is available out of the box anyways. So in order to use HTTP module, we need to add this to app module, I think, if I am correct. Yeah, so we need that in app module. Let's add the import here. So HTTP client module from the common Angular common package, and then we need to add it to imports here. So we got the HTTP client module here. Let's save this. Let's head back to our services file, and it's going to be injected by Angular. So let's use the HTTP client type here. So this will be injected. Let's import this. And also we would like to have HTTP options. Let's define as a constant so we can have header in it. HTTP, let's call it options. So this will have headers in it. New HTTP headers. And all we need to define here is content type. Content type is going to be application/JSON. Cool, that's good. Let's set the base URL. So our local host is running on, so basically our JSON server is running on 3000 port, and the path is movies. So we set that up. first API call we need is to fetch the movies list. So let's call it get movies. And so we return this dot http dot get. It's a get call, and then we pass the path here, this dot base URL. Okay, so basically http returns a observable, so we know we are receiving an observable from RxJS. So if we see, yeah, it's from RxJS. And now what kind of response are we receiving? So that's basically our movies interface list. So we're receiving an array of movies type object. And then get, and we typecast this as well, movies array. Cool, that's our first service. Let's use it in movies component and see if this works as expected. Now we need to have access to our movies service. So for that we can use Angular's dependency injection. So we can define it in constructor, and Angular will hopefully inject this dependency. So this is how we get access to our service. And now this lifecycle method of Angular component, we can make the call here. Cool. So what we are doing here is getting the instance of that movies service and making the HTTP call, get movies method we described in. And basically we are subscribing to that. Let's log the result out and see if we are getting the result back as we are expecting. So let's log out the array. Let's save and bring the browser in. Actually, we need to use a different lifecycle method to check the updates, because this will be only initialized once. So first time this might come empty. So let's use the different lifecycle method, which gets updated with every state change. And let's refresh this. Nice. So as we can see, we are getting the movies list here. So first one is empty, and then we get the list here. And this is the response, or JSON server returning back. Now our movies list is populated. So next thing we can use are filtered methods for watched and yet to watch movies. So let's go ahead and add some logic which will populate those two variables. So cool. So what we are doing here is checking the movie's length. So if the result, obviously if we receive the result, then movie's length is going to be more than 0. And then we are checking if watch movies length is not 0. It's not false. And then we are just filtering on the movies list, movies array, and checking if it's not favorite and it's not watched. We just put it into yet to watch movie list. And if it's watched, basically, if this flag is saying it's watched, we are putting it in the watch list. Now 2 of our categories are populated. Let's go ahead and change the HTML and try to display some movies list here. So let's start by creating a div wrapper. And we also want to show some sort of loading message when the API call is working. So for this, we can just use ngIf directive. This is from Angular. So this is basically, this runs if else condition. So if movie's length is less than 0, then less than 1, that means movies are still loading. So API call is still working. So we display this loading message. And next we can display the yet to watch movies .length. So here we are just checking if we have any movies which are still in the watch list, then we display this header text. If we don't have any movies available to watch, then obviously we don't need to display this. That means all of the movies in our list are already watched, or we don't have any watch list. Cool. So again, this is kind of a weird thing if you're coming from a React background. This directive and then putting logic in the double quotes inside the tags, but eventually you'll get used to it. Next, we want to display the movie tile itself. So let's go ahead and create another wrapper for the tile. So we'll use the toWatch class. Let's close this tag. Now let's use our movie tile component, which we used. Cool. So this is our movie tile component. And now we're going to use the ng-for directive again to loop through the movies, similar to what we did for the routes. So we are looping on the yet to watch movies. This is the individual movie we are getting from the array. And then the image URL is basically a property on the movie tile. And then we are setting the target and then the ID, watched click handler, and favorite click handler. Let's quickly go into movie tile just to recap what we are doing here. Movie tile component. And as we can see here, we have this image URL ID and these all properties here. And then we have these two click handlers. So basically they are just emitting the event. So it bubbles up to the parent. Alrighty, so this is failing. Let's see what it is saying. On favorite click, that is defined in movie tile. Oh, I see. Yeah, so this is from movie tile. And this is the handler we should have in our parent component, which we are saying here basically. And it's missing in our movies home component. As you can see, we don't have any handler here. Okay, so let's go ahead and add those handlers in. So this is on favorite click and we are receiving a movie object. Let's leave these two empty at the moment. Let's see if we get rid of the error. List appearing here. That's good. Let's try this. Add movie. Okay, we don't have anything here. We go back here. We have the list. We can cache the API calls as well, but it's probably out of scope for this project. So we have our watched list, yet to watch list. Now we need to have our watched list, the movies we have already watched. So basically it's going to be similar logic, very similar logic. It's just the array we're going to use is different. So here, rather than using yet to watch, we are using watched movies, which we have here. So you can see watched movies are filtered is watched. So this is just a filtered version of the database. And let's save this and let's see what we have here. Nice. So these are the movies we still have to watch. This is our CSS animation. And these are the movies we have already watched. So these are indicated by this icon. Here you can see this icon is not filled in. That means movie is not watched. So we need to add the functionality when we click on this one. Movie will be moved from movies to watch to watched category. And basically, we also need to update the database. So we'll make a post request to update that. Let's create our second service, update the movie if it's watched or set to not watched. So let's start adding that service in. So we'll call it update movies, and again we'll use an observable for this, as our HTTP module returns an observable by default. So what we want to do is create a URL or base URL, and basically we need to pass a movie ID as well, so server knows which movie to update with it, and then just return this object or result. So we use put for this. So this is for updating the current record, and that's about it. Our service is ready. I feel it's pretty cool and pretty easy to wire the services in and to use them as a dependency injection. So resolves a lot of issues like promises, chaining promises, or using async await. I mean, it's my personal opinion by looking at this or working on Angular first time. But don't get me wrong, I'm still pro React developer, so I love React. So, but it's just like we should appreciate Angular features as well if there is some positive. So as a software engineer, we should be open-minded. Let's go ahead and add our service or call our service from the onFavorite here. Right, so what we are doing here is we are calling this service update movies, and we need to pass the movie which is clicked upon. So what we are doing is basically spreading the movies object, and then we are setting is favorite. So we are doing the reverse of whatever is already in the object. So we are basically updating this flag. If it's true and it's clicked, is favorite is clicked, that means we need to reverse it. So it's just simple logic. So whatever is set, we just reverse it. And then is watched. If it is favorite, then we consider it watched, because if you haven't watched it, it can't be your favorite. And then otherwise we just take the value from here. Fill our list here. Now we also need to update our UI state. So what we can do here is, so let's find the movie in the watched list. Actually, we need to wrap it in a condition if movie is already watched. Right, so let's put the condition in. So if updated movie, which is basically coming from the updated movie result. So this is the result of our API call. And then we wrap it inside if condition. So if result movie is watched, what we do here is we find it in the array. So this is our watched movie list. We find that object or movie by the ID. So if ID matches, so if movie ID, which is in UI at present, and this is the resulted movie ID, if this match, then we set some flags on this movie. I'm going to go ahead and type the function quickly, and then I'll go over line by line. Okay, this is the final look of this function. So what we are doing here, if movie is already watched and found in current movies list, we update its favorite or watched flags. If movie is not found, we simply push it to yet to be watched list. Also, if movie is watched, we remove it from yet to be watched movie list, or vice versa. Very similar logic for the on watched click. So before we populated the function for on favorite click icon, now we are populating the function for the on watch click handler. So again, what we are doing here is getting the payload movie, destructuring it, and then is watched, we are reversing it. So if it was already watched, we set it to not watched, or if it's marked as not watched, we are setting it to watched. So it's just a reversal here. And we are setting the is favorite. If it's watched, we take it from is favorite. If it's not watched, we just set it to false, calling the updated movie here, our service, passing the payload and subscribing to it. And then again, we are checking if the movie returned from the database is watched. We just push it into the watched movie list. That means it's already watched. And then we remove this movie from yet to watch. We just filter it and remove that particular movie. And if it's not watched, then we simply remove it from the watched movies and put it into yet to watch list. Okay, let's check this. So let's mark Batman as watched. Cool, so it's moved into the watch list. Let's see what API says. So this is our API result. So favorite is false, is watched is true, and then rest of the stuff. So if we want to mark this favorite, say, so another API call is being made with a similar movie ID, and now we are setting this to favorite. And this is nicely synchronized with the API calls. So let's remove this from our favorites. So another API call is being made, and this is set to false. That's cool. Let's refresh this and make sure all is not just updating on the UI level. Yeah, it seems right. Right, now it's time to set our next screen, which is add movies. Let's start by adding the service this time. So we call it add movies. Again, we are receiving a movies object from this time from the add movies page. Obviously, we're returning the result as an observable from HTTP module. So we get the URL, base URL. And this time we are making a post request because this is a new entry, new addition to the database. Type of movie, this is our URL, this is our payload, and this is our HTTP options, which we defined here. We are simply marking the content type as application JSON. Cool, let's remove this space here. So our service is ready. Let's wire it up to the screen. We need to create the form as well. We can use Angular's built-in forms module. So this is pretty good for the handling of form related actions, events, and stuff like that. So let's import that. So basically we need to import it into apps module. As we know, we need to add it to the basic imports. So it's available throughout the application. So we already did for HTTP client and the fonts awesome module we installed. So let's add this as well. Let's save it and head back to our add movies TS file, and let's start building this out. Let's put together our adds movie form. So let's add some properties here. So movie title, image URL, basically, and if the movie is watched or not, as we are adding a new movie, so it makes sense to have these set to false by default. Now we need to get access to movie service plus router, because once the movie is added to the database, we will redirect the user back to the home page. Let's get the movie in. We got the movie service. Let's do the import here. And next is our router. Again, this is dependency injection pattern from Angular. So we get this out of box. So this will be injected by the Angular framework for us. We also need a on submit button click handler. So that's basically to do with once the user has put in the movie title and the image URL, then they can add it to the database or their watch list. We only want to call the service if movie title and the image URL is provided. So let's wrap it with the if-else condition. So we are checking if the movie title is provided, which is here, and the image URL. These properties will be binded to the HTML elements or form elements, which we will build in a second. We also need to assign a random ID for the movie. So for now, we can just use match.random rather than using any library to generate the unique ID. So what we're doing here is creating a new movies object. This is based on our interface, and we are setting the isFavorite. This is again binded to the HTML elements. We will have checkboxes there, and then the image URL and movie title, and then we are just doing a basic random ID here. So this is not the recommended solution. Obviously, this can generate a similar number as well. So there is a slight possibility. So we can use external library like UUID or write your own custom helper function to generate something like that. But for this purpose, I think this is more than enough. Lastly, we can call our service. So movie service, add movie, and this is the payload for that API call. We're passing the new movie we created. Again, subscriber to receive the response. And once we receive the response, we just instruct router to navigate to the home page. We can do more checks here, like checking for the errors, showing the pop-up for the error window, or do other sorts of things like a pop-up message for the successful movie edition. But those are not required for this simple application here. But I'm just giving you some guidance, like we can do a lot here if it's a real life application. Cool, let's build our HTML part of the add movie page. Let's get rid of this. And let's have a div with the add movie class, CSS class. Now we can have our form object here. This is from the framework again, so it takes care of events like propagation of event. So it stops the page from being reloaded. Let's add our first form field. So this class is coming from our global styles, from the styles SAS file, which we created in the beginning. So we are creating a label, movie title, movie name, and then we have the input field here. So type is text, name is movie title, and ng model. So this is basically a two-way binding. If we want to use two-way binding, this is the way we do it. So square brackets, and then you use ng model in these parentheses, and then we bind it to movie title. So it's a two-way binding, means like whenever you type something, or UI model will be updated, and vice versa. And then some basic stuff like we are assigning the ID and placeholder, add movie name. So this is our first field. Let's add the second field. So basically, you can also create some sort of JSON schema for the forms. I usually do that, but this is quite small, so we're okay to just use this kind of approach. So again, form class, so form control, and then this time we are using the two-way binding for the image URL. Same goes for rest of the two elements. So these are checkboxes which are wired to the isWatched property of our TS class. So these are our properties. And then is favorite. And last thing we need to do is put our submit button for the form. Now we can wire the form submit handler here and test this add movies functionality. All right, cool. So this is our current list. So let's go and add a new movie. Cool. So this is the form we just generated. So let's add the movie John Wick 4. And let's add the image URL. I just grabbed it from Google. And let's hit add movie. Boom. We got the John Wick here. It's pretty good. We can mark it watched, which is not true. We can mark it favorite, and let's mark it back to unwatched. Cool. So this is our movies watch list in Angular. Alrighty, let's conclude this now. We can start with some plus points. I think it has some nice features. Out of the box support for routers and SAS. No external bundler is required. CLI is pretty cool for generating components and services, which does more than just generating and also adds to Bootstrap config. Usage of dependency injection pattern is nice as well. Also, I disagree with most of the people complaining about learning curve is steep. It might be just my programming background, as I have used dependency injection pattern and frameworks like these in past when Adobe Flex was used as ultimate solution for enterprise level apps. Some negatives: I really don't like the usage of script inside HTML tags as strings. Looping over items to render HTML elements is weird. Now to big question, would I switch over to Angular? I think my answer is no. React is still the best option, and combining with Redux Toolkit, RT-Query, GraphQL, or even with plain React hooks and context API, it is still the best solution in my opinion. I would definitely consider Angular, but given a choice between two, React is going to be winner for now. Thanks for watching, folks. Do subscribe to the channel, and I will be sending the code repository link via email in next couple of days. Thank you.